a distinction between Korean Americans who believe that depression is a medical condition rather than something that they identify themselves with. Because the more, if they identify themselves as something that shows that they're weak, they're more unlikely to get services. But if they're educated enough to know that something like depression or anxiety is something that is a medical condition, they're more likely to receive it. And so I think that's where the education becomes very much important. So to become, for mental health services to become more adaptable to the Korean American culture, especially within the Korean American church. Well, actually, it's to use the Korean American church. The Korean American church has been something that Koreans have depended on for a long period of time, ever since they first immigrated to the U.S. I think about my mom in particular, in per se, who first immigrated to the U.S., and the only way that she was able to connect with other Koreans and to spoke Korean was by going to church. She wasn't even a believer, but didn't matter because she knew that by going to church, it was where she could connect with other Koreans, where she could get life advices, some resources, knowing where to get help, just everything. And so I think for years now, Korean churches have been such a something that Korean people have been, or at least the Korean Americans here, have been so dependent on in finding community and finding connection with like their own culture. So I feel like the mental health being something that is a lot more westernized, like this understanding of it, to bring it, if we want mental health to be something that's more that Korean people can, or Korean Americans can be willing to use more of, is, I believe it's by going through the church mostly. So with that being said, I know that a lot of pastors are not very much educated. Pastors or leaders or deacons, elders, are not very much educated in terms of the mental health, or there isn't too many of them that are very educated in terms of mental health and the mental health services that they can receive. And where I feel like is kind of the gateway into changing this understanding about mental health in the Korean church is by the pastors and the leaders and people who do make an impact in the rest of the congregation, especially as Korean culture is very much of a hierarchy, like they believe in hierarchy, and so pastors, elders, people, deacons, leaders are a lot of the people that Korean Americans will turn to when they have spiritual issues, emotional issues, relational issues, rather than going to a mental health service. And unfortunately, pastors aren't educated to help people with certain type of mental illnesses or having specific difficulty with certain types of family relational issues. There's some pastors who know kind of based on their own experiences and being able to teach and guide and counsel in that way, but there is definitely a clear lack of education in that area. So I know I talked about how I'm doing enculturation, which I know it's a bit of a stretch when you think about the way we've been talking about enculturation in this class has been very much centered around the gospel. How do we make the gospel something that is able to be relatable, adaptable into other cultures, which easily it is, for our understanding and how and who God is and what the gospel really means. And I'm not saying that mental health is something that I want to bring into other cultures like the Korean American culture, although in a way, it sounds that way, but more so that if enculturation happens, the gospel is being presented in the church, and there's issues like mental illness and relational problems that come up, and it's not dealt with, and what we know from research and what we know from just education, I feel like sometimes that can be a barrier into understanding the gospel rather than a support, if that makes sense. I don't know if what I make sense is, like if this is confusing at all, but let me know if it is. But pretty much what I'm essentially saying is that mental health can be that support of bringing the gospel into a more of an understanding for those who may need to experience the gospel in a different way than others, especially with someone with a mental illness. So just wanted to kind of make that clear. And as you can see, that's where advocacy very much comes into this, because I do want to advocate people who are struggling with mental illness, especially within the Korean American community, to be able to get the services that they need. So what am I doing? What are my DLA contact hours about, and how am I doing this? Because to be honest, there's not a lot of Korean churches who are. I don't know a lot of Korean churches that are doing or connecting with mental health services or has a counseling center within the church. So what I decided to do for this project is I kind of mentioned this before, but to start with Western churches, American churches that are doing it now, and to learn from there. Right now, in my own site at the Lake Avenue Church, as a trainee counselor, I am interviewing the director of our counseling ministries of how this even came about. How did they build this counseling ministry within their church, as well as other, I think therapists who are kind of talking about that same thing about how do we bring mental health and church into one. And with that, also talking with Korean American therapists who are also looking for that for their Korean American churches. So that's kind of basically what I'm doing. Right now, there's not only am I serving there and connecting with the pastors as well as therapists, directors, to kind of gain more understanding of what this looks like in the church, but also building groups, therapy groups, or connections with people in the church or outside of church, whatever it is, to kind of bring that awareness, if that makes sense. There's a therapy group that me and a core member is also doing for people who are going into ministry, so that ministers may be more comfortable in seeking therapy, and that's to say that that's okay. If pastors, future leaders in ministry are able to get therapy for themselves, to prepare themselves, how much more likely will the church, the congregation members, be allowed to do that as well as they look up to these same leaders, is kind of my thought process right now. I'm not sure if any of this makes sense, but that's kind of where I'm going with all of this, what I've been doing, and hopefully be able to put this all into a paper by next week, when our paper is due. So let me know your feedback and what you think. Definitely open to questions. But yeah, talk to you guys soon.